Dickinson is an American poet, and she was born in 1830. And you know that 1830 is a very important year in the history of American Renaissance. This Renaissance does not uh, go with the European Renaissance, or it is not analogous with European Renaissance. It is exclusively American Renaissance. So why should I call it American Renaissance? Because at that time, there was an initiative, or there was an attempt on the part of the Americans to develop Americanism, or to become Americans truly. And that very particular attempt or initiative can be branded as American Renaissance. Renaissance, as the term signifies, refers to revival, or rebirth. So what did the Americans wanted to revive? The Americans wanted to revive their own format of nationhood, their own format of nationalism, their own format or framework of thinking. They wanted to bring about distinct format or distinct disposition in their epistemology, or in their knowledge or knowledge system. For that reason, they wanted to think in their own way, not mimicking the European framework of knowledge. They wanted to come out of the mimicry. They didn't want to mimic the European attitudes or European dispositions or European way of thinking. And the man who was a pioneering personality in this very initiative was Emerson. And Emerson became very significant personality as an exponent of American Renaissance for his instructive framework for American knowledge or American way of thinking. And if you read Emerson's The American Scholar, it's a speech, and we read it as an essay, but actually it's a speech. And in that very speech, Emerson invited the American scholars to be American truly, in their attitude, in their practice of knowledge, or in their framework of ideas and ideals. And responding to Emerson's proposal or propositions, some writers came forward. For example, Walt Whitman, then Thoreau, Hawthorne, Robert Frost. These writers ultimately or subsequently contributed immensely to the development of Americanism. They did not, suppose if you think of the poets, especially Walt Whitman, you will find that Whitman does not follow the European format of rhyming or European technique or strategy of syntax in poetry or rhyme scheme or other rhetorics. So Walt Whitman has brought about significant changes in the diction of poetry He has also introduced colloquialism into poetry. And another important thing that we find bringing about revolutionary change in the intellectual world of the Americans was transcendentalism. Transcendentalism was a kind of attitude which believes that the existing social, political, religious, and cultural institutions bring about manipulation of your knowledge or of your ideas. That is, you are a free will agent, you are a man. And you know that Hegel has said will to power. Will to power is man's exceptional quality. If you have will to power, you can define yourself in your own way. You can also do what the other persons cannot do. You can also conquer the limitations of nature. That is called will to power. And this will to power is also very vital in the minds of the navigators, in the minds of the colonizers, in the minds of the conquerors of the world. If you have this will to power in your mind, you can overcome many barriers, or you can become exceptionally powerful, or you can conquer the topmost position of the ecosystem. That is will to power. So, this will to power works very vitally or potentially in transcendentalism. Transcendentalism says that if you are connected to a particular institution of the society, that very institution may misguide you or may manipulate you. Okay. Because institutions have got the authority to guide you or to lead you. For that reason, while you show your subjugation to an institution, you will be guided by that institution, and you have every possible chance to be misguided. I just like to give you an example. For example, myths of the society. In our society, or in every society, there are some myths, and these myths are very powerful. And these myths shape our mentality. These myths also shape our power structure. So myths cannot be discarded. You cannot avoid myths from your in your life. But myths may also play the role of oppressors. Myths also may torture you. These myths may be used by the powerful politicians of the society to control the people. For example, in 1774, Warren Hastings appointed 11 Pandits, that is Hindu Pandits, and their duty was to explore the old myths of the subcontinent and introduce Panditocracy, that is, introduce a particular system on the basis of those old Shastras, that is, scriptures. And with those scriptures or with those Shastra, the English rulers conducted the society. They controlled the society. Because while the people saw that the English were applying their old or local Shastras upon them, then because of their subjugation to those Shastras, they do not protest or they do not usually show any sort of resistance. Then the English became beneficiaries because with these myths or with these Shastras, they controlled the people, they divided the people in the society, they introduced casteism in the society. They call some people Brahmins, some Kshatriya, some Vaishya, and some Shudra. So they divided the society. And while they introduced division, they weakened the society because it destroyed the integrity of the society. If the people are divided in a society on the basis of casteism, then in a critical or precarious situation, while the country needed to protest or needed to fight against against the intruders, then they cannot be united and fight successfully. So in this way, we find that the English used the Shastras or our myths against our people. Okay, so myths are also a torturous institution of a society. Suppose you cannot walk alone in a village street. So why? Because the local myth says that there are ghosts or genies. And if a woman, a beautiful woman, walks alone in a village street, she may be in the trap of some evil spirits. Or sometimes myths are used to torture the people. For example, suppose you are behaving abnormally because of your psychological disorder, then some people will come forward and they will say that an evil spirit is uh, controlling you. So you are under the spell of an evil spirit. So how can he drive that very evil spirit? He will beat you with broom or with a stick. And he will convince the people that this is the effective way to drive away the evil spirit which is disturbing you. So he is torturing, he is inflicting physical torture upon you. But your neighbors do not protest. So why? Because they are controlled and convinced by the myths. So in this way, myths are very powerful, very powerful. Suppose a woman cannot give birth to a child, or suppose a barren woman. Suppose a woman cannot give birth to a child because of biological defect. Then how does social myth interpret this situation? That that very woman is cursed. Or some other people say that the woman's father or mother or ancestors were sinners. For that reason, that very woman was carrying out the sin of her ancestors. This is also a myth, and by this myth, she is controlled or she is tortured, both physically and mentally. So myths are very powerful, and myths can be used, and myths can also be misused. So while you are showing your allegiance to these myths, you have every possible chance to be misguided or to be manipulated or to be controlled by those myths. Then what should you do to be free? If you want to be free, you have to challenge those myths. But is it possible for a girl to challenge the age-old myths of a society? Most probably not. And if you think of witch trial, you must have heard this term, witch trial. Witch trial was a very common practice in European society or even in America. It was a very common practice. A woman was considered to be a witch and she was killed. That is, hundreds of villagers used to gather all around the woman and they used to throw stones at that woman and the woman died. So nobody protested. Why? Because the people were convinced by the myths. So what was the myth? The myth was that the woman was a witch and she was malevolent to this society, or she was harmful for this society. For that reason, the society did not protest or did not show any sort of resistance against the injustice inflicted upon that woman. So in this way, we find that myths are a kind of institution which control, which shapes, which also guides a community. So myths are very, very powerful. And subjugation to all these institutions, suppose myths, then social institutions, suppose schools, colleges, universities, or religious institutions, church, temples, pagodas, or political institutions. For example, the judiciary, police, answer, army, and different other institutions of the state. So all these institutions control people. And these institutions may also inflict injustice upon you through the consent of the people. As the people consent, they do not protest. So power can be exercised in two ways: through coercion, coercion means force, and through consent. Understand? If you let power exercise its dominance upon you, then you are giving consent. So power is working upon you through consent. And if you do not give consent, then what will happen? The power will be applied upon you through force, by force. So force or coercion and consent. These are the two ways, two means by which power works upon the subordinates, that is, subordinates or the ruled of the society. Anyway, in this way, transcendentalism developed. It was not analogous with mysticism. Mysticism that we find in European literature usually puts emphasis on the absolute purity of mind. And in the state of absolute purity of your mind, you will have the opportunity to be united with the eternal Spirit of God. That is called mysticism. So mysticism is a metaphysical tenet or metaphysical ideology. But transcendentalism is not metaphysical. It is very practical or pragmatic. This is the basic difference between transcendentalism and mysticism. So you must not think that transcendentalism is similar to mysticism. transcendentalism is different from mysticism. And this transcendentalism developed in 1830s. And in the writing of Emerson, we find its very vivid and distinct incorporation. Then another important aspect that worked with the advent of American Renaissance was that American society was developing a kind of consciousness of individual identity, communal identity. Suppose we are Muslims, this is called consciousness of our communal identity. Or a Hindu may think that he or she is Hindu. This is called communal identity. If we think that we are Bangladeshis, this is called our national identity, because it is related to our nation, our nationhood. And individual identity is mostly related to your sense of human dignity. Suppose you are a woman, you must not think that you are inferior to a man, or a woman must not think that he is superior to you. You have your dignity. You have your own place or space in the society. You have the potential to do many things. You have the ability, intellectual ability, to solve the problems that a man solves. So if you think like this, this is called individual identity. So you are conscious of your own identity. You are conscious of your human dignity. That is, you are a human being, so you have the right to live in this society with due dignity and prestige. So these are some of the aspects of American Renaissance that I have mentioned. And political consciousness was also developed. If you read Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, you have a text in your syllabus. Most probably it is included in your MA curriculum. In Civil Disobedience, Thoreau has said that every citizen has the right to disobey the government of the society if the government, in the name of justice, exercises injustice upon the people. Suppose Thoreau did not pay tax in protest to the government policy, and for that reason he had to go to the jail. And he wrote an essay, Civil Disobedience. And in that very essay, Thoreau has said that it is the right of a citizen to give or to pay tax and not to pay tax. If you think that the government is not benevolent, if you think that the government is not working for the favor of the people, then you have the right to protest. Now, how can you protest? You may stop giving or paying tax. So he stopped paying tax. And for that reason, he had to go to the jail. This is called civil disobedience. That is, you are showing disobedience to the government. So in this way, we find that some important things happened after 1830s. And in 1830, Emily Dickinson was born. So while Emily Dickinson was a girl or was a matured woman, she experienced a world around her which was totally American, which was not European. So that was a very important aspect that contributed immensely to the development of the poetic faculty of Dickinson. For example, I just like to mention that the technique, if you look at this poem, you will find that she does not follow the traditional diction of poetry that we usually find in many of European poems. So why didn't she do so? It is because of the influence of Americanism. And you will find the same technique in Walt Whitman. Whitman also did not follow the hard and fast rule of diction or syntax in poetry. So this is an example of Americanism.